The RB dead zone where fantasy managers cringe, where they think they might have to take a running back in that range. Last year, the RB dead zone brought us a ton of valuable running backs, unlike past years where last year you were able to draft a guy like a Rashad White, Jonathan Taylor after he came after that injury, DeAndre Swift. And so today we're talking about 5 running back dead zone values that I'm absolutely loving in fantasy football right now. Starting it off with player number 1, it's going to be David Montgomery. And the part that I do want to address right now is I made this similar level video about a month and a half ago. And when we were looking at the dead zone running backs at that time in July, there was a lot better options than there currently are. Because as we know, as we approach the season, running backs typically get pushed up the board. As people get excited for the season, they start to draft running back a little bit earlier. So the first player, like we said, is talking about is David Montgomery, who right now slides in as the RB2 on this Detroit Lions offense that has a top 5 offensive line. The biggest issue with David Montgomery is that he's in the backfield with Jahmyr Gibbs. And I am a big Jahmyr Gibbs proponent. Absolutely love the talent of Jahmyr Gibbs. Last year, David Montgomery had 13 total touchdowns in 14 games. So he was scoring almost a whole touchdown a game. But the biggest concern with a guy like David Montgomery is the fact that he only had a 48.4% snap share with Jahmyr Gibbs as a rookie. And so we're assuming the fact that Jahmyr Gibbs is going to improve into year 2. But it's that if we actually look at the overall snap share, really towards pretty much post week 10, like he was getting 39, 41, 28, 64, 36, 51, 40%, 40%, 49%, 56, 59, 43% of the snaps. And that really hurt his overall upside and value in fantasy football. Now, if we look at some of those weeks, he did achieve like RB12, RB13, RB15, RB17, RB15, like points per game numbers, even had like an RB7, RB9 week in week 19 and week 20. My big worry for a guy like Dave Montgomery is that big Green Bay Packers game that we saw in week 4 where he had that RB2 overall finish with 3 total touchdowns. How realistic is that going to be this season? Because we did see Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery, as much as they both got a little bit injured and both got to have a little bit of the limelight without the other, we did see Jahmyr Gibbs be super explosive in the time that he had without David Montgomery. With a running back like David Montgomery that finished where he did at the end of last season, finishing as that overall RB15 on points per game basis, the fact that you're able to draft Dave Montgomery right now is RB19, overall player 62, and I think we're looking at a very similar level output, maybe slightly behind, but I still do love the upside in case something were to happen to a guy like Jahmyr Gibbs, which I pray not because I have too many shares, but I do think Dave Montgomery is a great RB dead zone target to have in your draft. So absolutely go target some David Montgomery in the RB dead zone if you're absolutely desperate. Like I said, we don't love addressing the position here because I do like some of the wide receiver values a little bit better, especially if you went like a hero or a double hero RB early in the draft. But if for some reason you want hero and you're feeling to yourself, I really need a RB dead zone running back to give me as my RB2, David Montgomery does have that upside. We move to the second player in the RB dead zone that I'm liking right now, and it's going to be Mr. James Conner for the Arizona Cardinals. The more and more that we approach the season, the more and more I'm excited about this overall Arizona Cardinals offense, and that's going to play a big part to me loving some James Conner because James Conner is getting up there in age. He is 29 years old, will be turning 30 this year, but the last few years, 15 fantasy points per game was the RB13, 15 fantasy points per game the year before that, RB9 on a fantasy points per game basis, 17 fantasy points per game the year before that, RB7. Now, there is something that James Conner can never do, and that's play a fully healthy season. So that's kind of been the big concern for a lot of James Conner shareholders, for a lot of people drafting him year after year after year. It's like, hey, when he's out there, it's great. He has only played in 13 games the last 2 years and then 15 games in 2021. So as he continues to get up in age, you're a little bit worried about that. Plus the fact that they addressed the running back position with Trey Benson, who is an explosive young running back, 3rd round draft pick. So at some point, Trey Benson will be overtaking James Conner for that lead rushing role. It just always happens with these guys at some point. So the question is Trey Benson going to overtake James Conner this year? Or is this going to be like a next year type question that I don't have to worry about because I'm drafting James Conner for 2024 fantasy football? For me, I think at least for the first 8 weeks of the season, we're going to be pretty safe with James Conner, assuming he can stay healthy. But as we've seen, the injury history with him is not relevant. If we look here, last year, we're looking at the games. He missed 4 games with a knee sprain that happened in week 5. He missed 4 games last year with that knee sprain that kept him out for 4 straight weeks. So that's kind of the biggest concern. I mean, if we look at this overall injury history over the last few years since 2022, nothing crazy. It's usually just a bunch of nicks, but enough nicks that James Conner does end up being on your bench a little bit. So if James Conner is like your RB2, probably need to get an RB3 that you like, but I do like James Conner's overall upside when he is out there. My third running back in the RB dead zone that I do like and I am drafting is Rhamondre Stevenson for the New England Patriots. And we can agree the New England Patriots are maybe the worst team in football. Like, it's not not really close. We love some Drake May as a future prospect in Dynasty. Probably not going to happen this year. There's not a ton of receivers. I mean, there's a lot of hit and miss shots here in this New England Patriots offense, but the one part of this offense that is not hit or miss is Rhamondre Stevenson, who last year was the RB27 on a points per game basis with 12.1, RB10 the year before that with 14.7. He gets the major contract and they get rid of Ezekiel Elliott. Now, they do bring in a guy like Antonio Gibson, which may take away some of the pass work for Rhamondre Stevenson. I think that's the big concern for a lot of people is last year he wasn't getting the receptions. He only had 38 receptions, but the year before that had 69 receptions. So if he can get back to kind of being that full 3-down workhorse that also gets a ton of receptions, we could be looking at Rhamondre Stevenson as getting back into that top like back end RB1 type category. And of course, when you're drafting him as RB21 over a player 67, that is exciting. Now it is a worry about the quarterback play, but I think honestly the lack of quarterback play kind of helps Rhamondre Stevenson in the fact that there might be a lot of checkdowns. You just worry about those stacked boxes against Rhamondre Stevenson because last year averaged 4 yards per carry, but the year before that averaged 5 and 4.6. So those are kind of my big concerns with a guy like Rhamondre Stevenson. Last year, he did miss 3 games with a high ankle sprain in week 13. He also had an ankle sprain in week 7. So that never like cost him to miss any games. So there was a little bit of worry that, hey, maybe that ankle was kind of causing some of that explosion. We can kind of attribute the lack of yards per carry metric to that plus the offensive line. We'll have to see what happens in this next year for Rhamondre Stevenson in year 4, but he did get the contract. We do know the team likes him. They're going to be using him as the bell cow. So RB dead zone, shoot at your own risk. Like we said, there's warts on these guys because they're going in the RB dead zone. If not, they'd be going a lot earlier based on their situation and or production profile. We move on to my 4th player in the RB dead zone, and it's going to be DeAndre Swift for Chicago Bears, RB23 overall player 76. I felt like we called DeAndre Swift pretty good last year. I was pretty excited about it. My biggest concern about DeAndre Swift now is that he lands on a Chicago Bears offense that has Caleb Williams, and so that feels really great. But my biggest worry about DeAndre Swift is how much volume is he going to get in the Starville offense? Because last year, playing for the Eagles, he started off super hot, but only ended up with 6 total touchdowns. The year before that for Detroit, he had 8 total touchdowns. And DeAndre Swift pretty much past like week 8 was super inefficient in his overall points per game. I mean, week 11 versus Kansas City, he had 19 fantasy points. But if we look at the start to the season, 27, 14, 17, 16, 17, 10, 14, 19 fantasy points in week 11, and then it kind of just dies out the rest of the season. So that's kind of been my concern for a guy like DeAndre Swift. If he's not going to be getting the volume, especially in the Chicago Bears offense that also has Khalil Herbert and Roschon Johnson. I know they signed into the big extension, so that means that they have big plans for DeAndre Swift. They see a ton of value in a guy like DeAndre Swift. I'm just worried about the overall upside for him, but that's why he's also going in the RB dead zone because we don't know what a Caleb Williams-led Chicago Bears offense is going to be. And if it is super efficient, we could be getting this RB23 DeAndre Swift, and he could be that back-end RB1 that we're really projecting that has upside, but he also is going at pick 76 over a player RB23. So I like DeAndre Swift because I like the talent, but you let me know. What are your opinions on DeAndre Swift? Do you like the overall upside? Let me know down below. My final player in the RB dead zone that I'm absolutely loving right now is a guy by the name of Jonathon Brooks. I was texting, we're going to pull back behind the curtain. I was texting my boy Andrew over at the League FFB this week, and he was talking to me about, hey, where are you ranking Jonathon Brooks in your rankings this year? And it really made me pause for a second because I was like, listen, I personally have Jonathon Brooks around my RB30, and he was like, hey, I think I have him as my RB26 right now. Is that too high? Just because he loves the fact of what he saw from Rachaad White in a Dave Canales-led offense last year. So all of a sudden we're assuming this Bryce Young, Dave Canales-led Panthers offense, if Jonathon Brooks can come off that ACL, he could have a ton of receptions. Because if we look at Rachaad White's numbers, his receptions absolutely went skyrocketing. Now, is that because of the terrible offensive line and that was the only chance that they had to move the ball on first or second down? Or is that Dave Canales doing that purposely? I would say Bryce Young's a very similar quarterback to Baker Mayfield at this point in their both careers. So Jonathon Brooks, who does have a 3-down bell cow type workload status when he was at the University of Texas, plus he was drafted in the 2nd round, they're going to want to get him involved. That's super exciting. Now, the biggest issue, like we said, with Jonathon Brooks is he tore that ACL super late. So there's a little bit of worry for me that he's going to be on the pup for the first 4 to 6 weeks of the season. So it is a late round shot, but if he does come up back fully healthy, which always year 1 off an ACL, we always know it's not the best, and especially as a rookie, year 1 off an ACL from college. That's also a big concern for me for Jonathon Brooks. So trust me, I know it's risky, but I do think in this offense where it's pretty much him, Chuba Hubbard, and Miles Sanders, give me some Jonathon Brooks as a late round upside shot, because at this point, we're talking like, do you want an upside shot on Jonathon Brooks, or do you want to take a shot on a guy like Brian Robinson, who's sharing a backfield with Austin Eckler and Chris Rodriguez, or Zach Moss and Chase Brown, or Javonte Williams with Audric Estime and Jaleel McLaughlin? Like, I do think the overall rankings for Jonathon Brooks is good, and I think I'm starting to warm myself up to drafting Jonathon Brooks, especially if I can get Jonathon Brooks. Like, if it's a hero RB build and I can get him as my RB3 potentially, I love it. If I can get Jonathon Brooks as my RB2 on like a straight hero team, it's rough. It's rough. So like I said, if I've gone double hero, I can get him as my RB3. I do like the overall upside. Him as my RB2, I might want something safer, so I could go with a guy like Raheem Mostert and like Jonathon Brooks kind of back to back to kind of solidify my running back room. But I do think Jonathon Brooks, just based on what we saw metric-wise for him out of college, and shout out to Andrew for making me really dig deep into how I'm feeling about Jonathon Brooks, because I hadn't really made a video of him recently that I had to dive into. So let me know what you think of these 5 dead zone running backs. Are you drafting them? Are you not drafting them? We are on the way to 3,000 subscribers. So ladies and gentlemen, if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button, hit the like button. If you are new, it helps me out as the channel as so much. So I appreciate you guys for tuning in. I'll catch you guys on the next video that comes out tomorrow. So make sure you're tuned into that. Here are 2 more videos. If you haven't seen them already, click on that. I'll catch you on the next one. Peace.